I'm about to fly off to Bahrain for the first official meeting and visit of an Israeli prime minister in the kingdom. I'm going to meet the king, I'm going to meet the crown prince, and have a series of meetings whose goal is to fill with energy and content the peace agreements between the two nations. I think especially in these tumultuous times, it's important that from this region we send a message of goodwill, of cooperation, of standing together against the common challenges, and of building bridges to the future.
Latest news, Israel-Iran. Headliner, Israeli jets escort U.S. bomber to Gulf in fresh show of force to Iran, dated February 14, 2022. Israeli F-15 fighters escorted an American B-52 bomber as it made its way through Israeli airspace en route to the Persian Gulf on Monday in an apparent show of force to Iran amid lingering tensions in the region. The Israeli Defense Force said in a statement that the flight was held as part of a close cooperation with the U.S. military, which represents a significant element in ensuring the security of the State of Israel's airspace in the Middle East. The B-52H Stratofortress, which is capable of carrying a nuclear weapon, flew from its base in the United Kingdom through the Straits of Gibraltar over the Mediterranean through Israeli airspace and out over the Red Sea before traveling back on roughly the same route to the United Kingdom, as could be seen on public flight tracking software. The U.S. military said the flight was meant to demonstrate the U.S. Air Force's ability to seamlessly operate across combatant commands. It said the B-52 was also accompanied by two F/A-18 Hornet fighter jets. Israeli jets escorting American bombers have become a regular fixture in the skies of the Middle East in recent months as tensions between Tehran and the West have risen. While an attempt is underway to negotiate a new nuclear deal to prevent the Islamic Republic from obtaining an atomic weapon in exchange for sanctions relief, Israel, which is not party to the talks, has maintained its freedom to act against Tehran's nuclear program if it deems it necessary. To that end, the Israeli Air Force have begun conducting exercises simulating strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, with the U.S. military official reportedly observing one recent drill. Recent weeks have also seen a noted rise in attacks by the Iran-backed Houthi militia in Yemen against the United Arab Emirates and some Saudi Arabia, two key U.S. allies in the region. Headliner, Russia, Ukraine is important, but Iran is greater danger. Lindsey Graham, dated February 14th, 2022. Stopping a nuclear Iran is the world's most pressing issue today, said Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican out of South Carolina. He said on Monday in Jerusalem, Russia seemingly being on the cusp of invading Ukraine, China's behavior toward Taiwan are important, consequential moments in history, he said in a press briefing. But the one we're not talking about enough is even more consequential, that the Iranians break out and acquire nuclear capability. Russia and Ukraine are important, but this is the game changer of all game changers. Russia and China are rational actors, even though their behavior is thuggish, he added. Iran is a theocracy motivated by religion that compels them to purify their faith and have the world submit. The Nazis wanted a master race, and the Iranians want a master religion. People like that cannot be ignored. Iran reaching nuclear breakout would lead to a chain of events, including Sunni Arab states developing their own nuclear weapons, Graham said. That's not a conjecture, that's a fact. All you need to do is ask the Sunni Arabs and they'll tell you. Graham said he had no doubt that Israel would do what she has to do, and that would be to launch an attack to stop the Iranian theocracy from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Graham pushed back against those arguing, is it possible to live with a nuclear Iran? He said in response, I guarantee you the Jewish people can't live that way. One Holocaust was enough. There will be war. Why can't Iran have nuclear weapons? Because Israelis say never again. Graham was in Israel, the country with the best knowledge and the most skin in the game when it comes to Iran, to meet with Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, and Defense Minister Benny Gantz. He was also briefed by the Mossad and met with opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu. He said, I came away very concerned that without some intervention, some course change, the world is putting Israel in a very bad spot. Graham sought to find common ground between Israel and the U.S. on how much Iran's nuclear program should be restricted. Israelis say a nuclear-capable Iran is a non-starter. America says we would deny Iran a weapon. I'm in the capability camp. I'm going to flesh out that capability. Nuclear capable would mean that Iran has enough enriched uranium for a weapon. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action sought to keep Iran a year away from that point. Sources in Washington and Jerusalem say the renowned deal would likely put Tehran less than half that time from breakout. For Iran to have a usable nuclear bomb, it would then have to weaponize that stockpile and have a delivery system for it. Graham would also respond that I've been talking to the Israeli government about their view of red lines, what things about the missile program, about a non-starter. What do we weigh in about enrichment to that point that all bets are off? What point would suggest to you that weaponization is afoot? Graham said he plans to go back to Washington and work on a bipartisan agreement about articulating what red lines would look like to provide clarity to avoid a conflict that would be bad for the region and bad for the world, but is inevitable if something doesn't change. Asked whether leaving the JCPOA was a mistake, Graham said it was not, but the mistake was that the JCPOA allowed Iran to enrich uranium. Why would you allow the largest state sponsor of terror in the world to have a robust enrichment program? I don't know. Weaponization is a fairly complex endeavor. A lot of Iranian scientists have had a lot of accidents, and we would expect more accidents to come. The Iranians regime seek nuclear weapons as an insurance policy for survivability. It will suffer a lot to get there. What they won't suffer is the destruction of the regime. Graham estimated that there would be 70 votes against the JCPOA 2.0. A vote should be held so that the Senate, as elected representatives of the American people, can have their say about whether a deal is reached. If it's anything like it's been in terms of scope, it will fall far short of the votes necessary to ratify the agreement. Consequently, the agreement, if there is one, will have no legal effect beyond the current administration. Graham, along with Senator Bob Menendez, a new Democrat out of New Jersey, introduced a resolution for the United States and other countries to establish an international fuel bank so that the region can have nuclear energy without enriching uranium, something he said France had proposed in the past. Graham went on to say about it, I'm certain the Iranians will say no because it denies them their true goal, which I think is a nuclear bomb, but it's good to find bipartisanship in terms of an alternative. Asked whether the Israeli government's policy working closely with the Biden administration and not vocally criticizing its Iran policy, as Netanyahu did when the Obama administration negotiated with Iran, was making it harder to argue against renewing the JCPOA. Graham said he encourages Jerusalem to have a working administration with the Biden administration. Something Senator McCain told me is that foreign policy is about outcomes. I think Israel will be supportive of working with a bipartisan group in the United States to provide clarity to the Iran nuclear weapon. We will disagree about the JCPOA, but the Biden administration, if they choose, will find a receptive audience among Republicans, including me, to tell the Iranians what they cannot do. Regarding Ukraine, Graham said he did not know what will happen, but he thinks it is likely that Russian President Vladimir Putin will expand his footprint to weaken Ukraine as a democracy instead of taking the whole country down. That's the latest news. And now my thoughts. The United States has the goal to dictate to another country what it can and cannot do regarding the defense of their own country. The United States, Israel have nuclear weapons. It's the United States that is surrounding Iran. The insistence by these war profiteers in Congress, who are also being told by their officials in the Pentagon, as well as retired generals, that their alignment with the Gulf and with Israel is just as important as American foreign policy. If you don't see a problem with this, then you are someone who thinks that other countries can influence American politics and their geopolitics. And with that, we cannot ensure that American democracy is successful. Not only do we not have a democracy anymore, we don't even have a government that represents the people. They represent the interests. And in this case with Iran, where are the primary interests lay? They lay with the Pentagon, the private military industrialists, and their foreign lobbies. I cannot say this enough, and it's almost I almost sound like a broken record to this point, is that throughout the 1970s, throughout the 80s and 90s and current times, we have made a complete reversal regarding our thoughts of how much influence those entities can dictate American politics. For example, during the 1950s, Iran's nuclear program began with the help of none other than the United States. This would last for the next 13 years. There's an article made by Sam Rowe of the Chicago Tribune back in 2009, where he writes, the headliner is basically an atomic threat made in America, where he talks about the Tehran Nuclear Research Center, which was established by the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, helped by its enrichment of uranium. And on March 5th, 1957, a proposed agreement for cooperation and research was announced under President Dwight Eisenhower's administration in his Atoms for Peace program, the Atoms for Peace program, which began in 1953. Now, the participation of the United States and Western European governments in Iran's nuclear program continued until the Iranian Revolution toppled the Shah of Iran, who was basically put there by the CIA and regarding their involvement in a coup in 1953, getting rid of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who was democratically elected by the people. Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, basically was just an extension of the United States, a puppet, if you will. And after that revolution, most of the international community cut Iran off, and which leads to the current day. Now, regarding Graham's comments, this is an ignorant man, and he's not stupid. The thing about Graham is that it's not him speaking, it's his interest. And the interest is what I've outlined earlier or previously. And since he's someone who aligns himself strongly with the Israeli government and the Likudniks, as I call them, it's no shocker to anyone listening that he is going to speak very favorably and highly of Israel. But what does that tell you? I mean, that right there should tell you proof evidence right in your face that the United States are being led by their interests, not by the people. The people don't want war. And for him to say that Iran is the exporter of terrorism around the world, well, let me give you some helpful hints or bits of information. It was Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, who facilitated and promoted the Wahhabi ideology, which is antithetical to Islam, which is not Islamic, and promulgated this ideology throughout the world during the oil boom, the 1970s and 80s. This ideology permeated in the Afghan civil war. After the war, it sent all those jihadists around the world, some which have been armed and trained by numerous intelligence agencies, including the CIA, the Pakistan ISI, the British MI6. And those people that fought in the war and survived went back to countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, the United States, as well as even in some European countries like Spain, Germany, Sweden. Then these madrasas, funded by the millions of dollars to the numerous Saudi-funded mosques, began teaching this ideology, which helped to create Al-Qaeda affiliates like Abu Sayyaf, Jeddah Islamiyah, Boko Haram, and then later the Islamic State, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Jabhat al-Nusra. These are not Iranian-backed groups. These are groups and organizations that gave us some of the worst terrorist attacks in the world, including mostly against the United States, including the 1998 East Africa bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, the USS Cole bombing in Yemen, the 9/11 attacks on September 11, 2001, and then later the numerous car bombings, beheadings by the Islamic State in Iraq, which later became the Islamic State in Levant, which extended to Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Great Britain, Spain, Sweden, and even here in the United States. These aren't Iranian-backed proxy forces. These aren't Iranian-influenced organizations. These are all groups and organizations which are influenced and supported by the Gulf. And for Graham to make this assertion that Iran is the greatest threat to Israel and the United States, they've been saying this since the 1979 revolution. That is now 43 years. Iran itself would be suicide if they don't build a nuclear weapon, because the only countries that are forcing their military to surround a country is the United States. Iran doesn't have any threat to the United States, nor are they a threat to Israel. Why? Because even if they were, that would mean their own suicide. They don't believe in the Salafi martyrdom ideology. They're a Shia country. And as, like I said, in order to go forwards and understand what's happening, you have to go backwards. Take a look at the countries the United States coalition bombed and invaded after September 11, 2001, in the war on terror. Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. Some of those countries are Shia countries and have interests with Iran. You could see the writing on the wall. And if you can't, then you're blind. You're blinded by either your political affiliations, your religious affiliations, your racist affiliations, or you're just ignorant regarding the reality of this world, which is being torn apart by the foreign interests and the interests of oligarchs and profiteers and even sociopaths. It's time that we speak out before it's too late.